this hearing together, and I've appreciated very much your testimony. The stories are obviously very, very compelling. And I have one of my own. I mean, we've heard the statistics, but, and I don't need to repeat them, but this November I held a roundtable event with social service agencies in a community that's experiencing 18% plus unemployment in my district, just to hear how they are dealing with the downturn and how I could help as we look at legislative solutions. Even with the incredible resources going toward the SNAP program as a result of the Recovery Act, too many in my district are still going hungry, just simply to reiterate what Congressman McGovern has said. I was overwhelmed by the number of agencies and nonprofits that reported hunger as the #1 problem facing their clients. As one example of many, at the Lazarus House in Lawrence, they distribute 8 tons of food each week, up from 3.5 tons this time last year, and even that's too much. And it's still not enough. So clearly, in spite of our best efforts, hunger is a tremendous problem in this country. But I have a slightly different question that goes to more structural issue looking forward, and that has to do with asset limitations in our programs, our safety net programs. Through through categorical eligibility and some asset exemptions, we have addressed some but not all of the asset limits in the food assistance programs, but not in a very uniform way. Among federal anti-poverty programs more broadly, assets are treated very differently, creating a lowest common denominator effect for low-income families who may depend on more than one federal program to survive the downturn. These low asset limits require low-income families to spend down any modest savings, including retirement savings, they may have before they receive assistance. This is, in my view, this is a penny-wise but pound-foolish strategy that ultimately costs the federal government more by forcing families perhaps facing temporary needs to permanently lose the assets that would help them once again escape from poverty once the economy improves. And to deal with that in a narrow context, I will be introducing a bill in January to address asset limits in SSI and peg them to inflation to begin to raise the lowest common denominator bar. My question, though, to all of you is, will families entering poverty as a result of the downturn be able to return to their former status once the economy recovers, or are we seeing a new generation entering chronic poverty? The recovery is having a large impact on low and middle income families, but many are still struggling. What impact would higher asset limits have had on helping some families on the cusp of long-term poverty avoid it?
I think, again, this is probably an issue where there are different parts of the spectrum. So the families that have been successful at moving into the labor market, have had success at increasing their incomes. I think that building up the assets is what they'd all like to do and would help them. I think for people at the bottom, it wouldn't. But I think the other, it wouldn't help them as much. But I think that the simplification across programs is just a smart way to do business for governments. It will save time and resources that can be used in other ways. As far as the what are the long terms, I think we need to acknowledge that the unemployment rate is going to be high for some periods of time. And I know there is, Ron sort of worries that, we're going to move away from this focus on work. But I think if we think more about long-term opportunity, it is a perfect time for people on TANF or on other programs to take advantage of education. And we need to make that more of a more viable opportunity for them. And so I think that, yes, I am concerned of the long term, but I also think there are things we can do to fix some of the constraints that would allow people to use some of this time to just create a better future for themselves, and we should do that.
Would anybody else like to respond?
I'd just like to note that in Wisconsin we have no asset limit for our medical assistance program for families called Badger Care. We've also eliminated it in our food stamp program and our child care program, which in terms of administrative ease has been great. We do have an asset limit for TANF, but it does allow families, middle-class families now, to utilize food stamps without having to worry about spending down assets.
Thank you.
And I would say in South Carolina, we've got different asset tests for different programs. We've got an asset test for the TANF program, and we have a separate one for the low-income families. And I think that there's been a real problem with families being able to have one-stop shopping, for lack of a better word. What we're seeing are people applying in one state agency and the other state agency not wanting to take the information from the first state agency because of the differences. That causes a lot more administrative costs. It causes suppression in going from one program to the other, and I think that it would be wonderful to see one asset test for all of the different programs, and recognizing that for some things we need to eliminate certain assets completely.
Thank you. My time is up. Thank you.
Ms. Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the panelists and my friend, Congresswoman Moore.